But I also want to say it's a lot more complicated than that. There are a lot of other factors, right? Like those list of ingredients. There's certain things that could be changing that could be helping hurricanes, but there's also other conditions that might be changing that hurt them. Things like maybe we have warmer sea surface temperatures, but we have an increase in vertical wind shear, just like in the case, hopefully.
So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Andy Revkin. This is a special pop-up Sustain What webcast on challenges facing science, especially climate and weather science. In this case, we've had trouble sustaining systems that are critical for understanding current and future conditions, and also the past. I've written about them before on the blog and the New York Times many times. Under the Trump administration, sadly, the effort to not just cut budgets, but cut the human infrastructure around these systems has been devastating. And Congress is holding the line to some extent. Historically, they have done so for budgets for science, but now the enabling process here has been really troubling. And for a number of scientists in the weather and climate community have gathered to do a 50-hour marathon. Last year there was a 100-hour one to make the point, to introduce people to the science, the observational and analytical work that's essential to the weather forecasts that we all rely on. You want to understand what El Nino is going to do in this year, later this year, or the like. You can't do it without observations. Just a couple days ago, I posted about the eroding ocean observation system, which the New York Times had an article about. And you know, it seems boring, these buoys and things, but they're not. This work is essential. So this, I'm going to dip into the live stream periodically, but I've got three of the participants here to help us understand a little bit more, so you can have a conversation basically with people who are involved with this. The website is wclivestream.com, which I'm posting over my face there. If you want to listen to us for a while and then go there, this will be going on through tomorrow, on the internet. So just to pause briefly, I'm going to shift gears to our the panelists I've got here, and if you make sure you're unmuted, and I'll start with Claire Roberts, Claire Singer at the top of the window here, who's in Colorado. And Claire, I just thought we'd start by each of you introducing yourself and, you know, what you do and why you're involved with this and what the goal is.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for having me on. Right, so my name is Claire Singer. I'm a research scientist at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm one of the organizers of the Weather and Climate Livestream. In my research life, I study clouds, how they form from their smallest scales at the individual droplet level, to thinking about the impact that clouds have on Earth's whole radiation budget, and understanding how clouds respond to and contribute to a changing climate. In my role, my hat that I wear as a weather and climate livestream organizer, I'm doing this work because I want to be able to continue doing my research for a very long career. And I want the important science that the US has enabled over the past many decades to continue to be able to support the lives, health, infrastructure of our country that we have become so reliant on. Sometimes it feels like it's in the background a little bit. It's this amazing thing that our country has built that we just take for granted, and we're trying to get people excited about the beauty of the science, that all the things that we learn about the Earth by doing this science, but also all of the things that it benefits them in their everyday lives, about having their weather forecasts, all the way to their cities being able to plan infrastructure projects over the next decades, to understanding what El Nino is going to do in the coming seasons. So that is why we're out here with the live stream. And thank you so much for having us on to talk about it on your show.
Oh, that's great. What's been the vibe? I mean, you're in an area of the country where science is really a major um, part of the social infrastructure. In Boulder and thereabouts. Um, where right now you're at JPL, another place in Palo Alto that's got that same feel. But just in terms of the way that region functions back home where you are in Colorado, how challenging has this been to think about NCAR, a place that I started visiting in 1985 when I was writing about nuclear winter, let alone global warming, um, that could be turned into a resort.
Yeah, it's definitely personal on many levels, for the people who are scientists, but also the people who live in places like Boulder that are such a weather and climate scientific powerhouse community. Any person living in the city of Boulder knows someone who in some way has been involved in the weather and climate science enterprise, from NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, to the collection of NOAA laboratories that are housed in Boulder, to the university. There's just, it's a real hub. And
Right.
so it's quite personal, I think, for all the people, even if they themselves are not involved in the research.
Yeah, I'm showing you a post that I did a while back about when the NCAR announcement was starting to get around. This is not your creation, it's my creation, but there's something about this demolition process that feels resonant, sadly. And Congress, again, a key goal of the live stream is to get people to get in touch with their their representatives in Congress to make the point that this matters regionally, in your congressional district, let alone for the sake of climate resilience and the like. So the live stream is continuing. I'm going to dip in it on a minute too. But Rob Socolow, Princeton emeritus professor, I've known you for a very long time. I dare say maybe as long as Claire has been alive.
A lot longer than that.
I don't know. So, from your standpoint, just give a sense of why you're energized by this.
This climate science enterprise is too valuable to lose, and we're not really explaining that. We're here. It needs third-party validation, and I feel I'm part of that. I've joined this. I'm emeritus. I watch the young people struggling at this time. But I don't think the public has heard the case, that this is about our own survival. It's careers, it's learning science and having fun. But unfortunately, it's a characterization. We cannot do without learning about the planet we are changing at quite a rate. If you think 5 years, no, think 50 years. Think about and realize that we are flying blind. My summary statement is we do not know. Climate scientists do not yet know how fast bad things will arrive. They are learning. They are learning there is no planet B. I'm a veteran of the 1960s when we discovered these issues. And the phrase, there is no planet B, which Andy, you were part of it. You're in that same generation. We knew this was important on its own. And the other part of it, I'm watching young people and senior scientists whose capabilities are being destroyed. And I feel as if this is an arc. Sputnik went up 1957. I was a college undergraduate. The embrace of natural scientists was incredible over the next few years. And I was a direct beneficiary. I might not have become a scientist if it hadn't been for this extreme welcome. We need you, get to work. It took the form of a predoctoral and a postdoctoral fellowship from the NSF, National Science Foundation, preferential treatment in the draft, and we had a draft at that time if you were in the sciences. And here we are at the other end of all this. I call this the anti-Sputnik moment.
Yeah.
I didn't see this coming. I'll say one or two more things. I did not see. I mean, I'm just baffled. I did not see in Trump's election and coming to power in January of 2025, wasn't really signaled in the first term that he wanted to destroy climate science. I didn't see it coming. It seemed, and science in general, it seemed to me that "Make America Great" meant leading the world in science. It seemed to me the most obvious thing we could possibly say. So I don't think we've come to terms, and we need to come to terms with what it is that has made it politically palatable, much less attractive, to say to people that we don't need science. I would react to the same way you do, almost a sense of such deep anger at the idea that we were deliberately taking instruments that are useful to understanding the ocean and destroying them. I've tried to look for, I've had a sleepless night over it. I said, well, let's decide to paint over the Sistine Chapel. I mean, it's undoing something that's wonderful. How do we get there? What is it? And I do think the climate scientists, I will do everything I can to help them figure out, because I'm really, I'm once removed from it all. How do you get your message out more powerfully? Explain what the scientific method is and why it is amazingly an amazing invention that lets us fix things and correct them and keep learning, which no other method ever has, and that we need to know what we're doing to the planet. We know that the planet is itself, as my friend Steve Bacala says, twitchy. We don't really know how fast it will react to some perturbation. We can't dismiss outcomes that we, even if they're low probability, because we don't know enough yet. All right. I see you.
David Hawkins says, great to see you, Rob. Carry on.
Great to hear you, David.
Yeah, I have to.
He is one of the leaders of this environmental movement from the same generation that I am.
There's a point being made in a comment from Charles Rotter, who's a climate skeptic, and I think he raises a point that I think is worth conveying here before we go on. I mean, he says we don't need bad ideologically motivated science. Conflating that with science is the problem. Now, there has been all kinds of exaggeration of both ends of the spectrum, as far as I can tell, in the policy arena when it comes to trying to make a point about science, and both sides have played that game sometimes. Even I wrote critically about the IPCC, the climate panel, when Pachauri would sort of get into the driver's seat and tell us what to do rather than tell us what's happening. So Charles, he makes his points playfully and kind of a.
I completely agree.
But there is a point to be made here.
Both Nader and I have been working particularly with the physics community and with the doubters. I put a lot of time into that, understanding where they're coming from. And the reason I find Livestream appealing is young people without pretense, almost all of them, are saying what they do and why they care about it. And if they have to come on the scale, I think will show up in those intervals. And for the most part, this is a group that doesn't. They are motivated by getting the planet straight.
Yeah, and I will say, I did a show recently on the importance of maintaining long-term observations, and I played a clip from the ultimate carbon dioxide skeptic, your Princeton colleague, Will Happer, who told me in 2017, I love the buoys, I love the satellites, we need more observation. That Congress and our country tends to negate long-term observation. This is Will Happer.
I wish they would spend some chips, because they do believe that. Because they.
I think it's not. I mean, you can have what I'm saying is you can have a nonpartisan argument for maintaining all of these systems.
Yes, Will could speak up this afternoon about these ocean probes.
What was that?
Will Happer could speak up this afternoon about these ocean probes, and we could have a serious discussion of it.
Yeah.
Maybe they're out of date. We need this conversation. I suspect they aren't.
I agree. Oh, and look,
I'm not an expert on what they do.
Charles says, and we agree on that.
Agree on that. Good, Charles. I'd like to talk further with you.
Yeah, I think we all can agree. And here, just maybe before we get to Nadir, I just want to unmute a little bit so we can listen a little bit to what's going on.
Because communities don't want to be monitored, so it had to.
Again, this is a live stream
to build
of
trust
scientists explaining their work.
To put in place the monitoring devices that can actually lead to the conclusion that yes, air, water, and food are critically less available in the divested neighborhoods than the rest of the city.
Great. Thank you so much for commenting on that. It's really important. We have another question from, well, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that, Tyvri Mayhap. Do you interact with the EPA? Does the EPA play a role in regulating the water and the water quality in the Chesapeake Bay?
Yes, the EPA does a lot of monitoring itself. The state of Maryland also creates a Chesapeake Bay water report. And then we have at the local level, Blue Waters Baltimore, BWB. And we work with all of these three agencies. And it's things that I'm learning, and I'm an architect. I'm not really a biologist, but I'm learning things about, we were so excited that Jones Falls, because of the Friends of Jones Falls, we go there and clean. Now the urban farmers are also keeping the Jones Falls clean. And it was just a very exciting day for us to see an American eel.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea that the American eel, because I'm not a biologist, I did not know, or a zoologist, I did not know that the American eel goes all the way to the Bahamas to spawn eggs. And then the small baby eggs swim all the way back to Jones Falls.
This is a great example of the interdisciplinarity issue. And this, biology, climate, hydrology, geology, chemistry, they're all intertwined. And the more those scientists interact, the more they understand those connections themselves, let alone the rest of us. So I want to get to Nadir now. Maybe you could introduce yourself, where you work. Jivanji is your last name.
Yeah, I'm Nadir Jivanji. I'm a staff scientist at a federal research lab in Princeton, New Jersey, the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory. It's a NOAA laboratory. And we build climate models here. In fact, NCAR is kind of our sister modeling laboratory across the country. And GFDL, I think, was, perhaps the earliest, NCAR following shortly afterwards. And the two institutions have really complemented each other in terms of their efforts at model development over the years and decades, really. And my interest in the live stream, I think, has already been articulated a bit by Claire and Rob, but there's just all this wonderful, interesting, and valuable climate science that I don't think we've fully or properly conveyed to the public. Where, like many scientists, we're busy publishing our papers and going to conferences, and in climate science, we're also engaged with the IPCC and in policy discussions. And of course, there's a small subset of folks who are communicating with the public, but sometimes that leads to this sort of polarized discussion that you were referring to, Andy. And I feel like there's a lot of, just kind of the more mainstream science whose story hasn't been told. And scientists who, as was remarked upon earlier, don't have their thumb on the scale. They're just trying to learn about the planet, whose faces have not been seen. And I was one of the co-organizers of the live stream last year. This year, I'm more of just a participant. But it's really gratifying to just see all these faces on the screen, presenting their science in a way that's intelligible to lay audiences, and just getting it out there and showing our faces. I'm also involved with some other climate outreach with a handful of colleagues, called Climate Up Close. And there, we actually try to go in person to different parts of the country and speak in synagogues and town halls and libraries. And again, just try to bring not only the science, but also our faces, who we are as people, some just humanity to who we are and what we do.
That's a fantastic, I hadn't been aware of that project. That's great. Talk a little bit, go into a little more depth on that.
I mean, some of the motivation is the same. It was actually, it was born out of the, really in some ways out of response to things that were happening during the first Trump administration. And in fact, I had just come to Princeton. Will Happer had just accepted a post as the White House. Rob and I actually engaged with Will a little bit. That's another story. But these colleagues and I, also peers, early career folks, we didn't, this was back in 2018, 2019, our first tour was in 2019. And we, even at that point, felt very uncomfortable about the tenor of the climate conversation, and the way misinformation was just kind of, sailing on the airwaves, and people were talking past each other. And just the state of the climate conversation really concerned us. And we didn't feel comfortable we felt that the science was being misused and misunderstood in a variety of ways. And we didn't feel comfortable just, staying perched in the ivory tower, with our noses buried in research and not trying to contribute to that conversation somehow in addition. And at that time, and I think still at this time, the issue was not just of scientific credibility, but just of trust. Like, are scientists seen as, someone that you might know that is your neighbor and someone who's part of your community, or are these, people who are, just in the highly urban areas, in the academic centers, a bit removed from society? So we deliberately went out to places, central Pennsylvania, the Florida Panhandle, Iowa and Nebraska, places far from sort of like the typical coastal academic centers, to try and, dispel that narrative and that perception of science in general and climate scientists in particular.
What was the reception like? What were some of those meetings like?
Yeah, there's a few interesting aspects to it. I mean, one was there's always just been gratitude that, because we take time off, we're sustained by small donations. So it's really just kind of a shoestring operation. We're often staying in the houses of family members or connections that we have in the regions that we go to. And so we're really doing it out of love and a belief that this is important, and our audiences can tell, and they're uniformly just so appreciative that the scientists, that we have taken time out to come to them and bring the science to them. And then the reactions to the science are interesting. We really do try to, play the science down the middle without a thumb on the scale, as Rob says.
Mm-hmm.
In our presentation, we try to emphasize, we kind of break climate science into three buckets. And there's the bucket of things of science that's fairly settled, where we have a high degree of confidence in certain conclusions. So we talk about that. Then there's aspects of climate science where we feel we know some things, but it's not, things aren't totally nailed down. A lot of, for instance, extreme weather phenomena and how they'll change with climate kind of goes in that middle bucket, where we think we know how it's going to change, tornadoes, floods, droughts, but the historical data is noisy and you can't always make super definitive statements. And you can see that in the IPCC reports. And then we'll have a third bucket for, the really uncertain stuff, the tipping points, what's going to happen to the ice sheets and to the Amazon and to the ocean overturning circulation. And we try to level with the audience and say that, there's a lot of uncertainty out there and we don't know. And if people are telling you that, these things are definitely coming down the pike, that's a little bit of an overstatement. Mm-hmm. And people in general really, in some ways that makes intuitive sense. Of course, any scientific field is going to have the things that it's sure of, the things that are pretty uncertain, and stuff on the boundary, and you're always just trying to push that boundary outwards. And so I think that message kind of lands well because it makes intuitive sense, and they feel like we're talking straight to them, which we are trying to do. So that's been the overall response to that.
Well, what do you think for the webcast? Feels like it's a moment in time. There is a goal to generate calls to Congress people, and yet these issues tend to come and go when this is like a perennial challenge. And as you said, you all have your regular work to do. How would this play forward? Is there a goal for how to keep this moving beyond today's ephemeral, really valuable and ephemeral conversation? I mean, what I do on this show is mostly ephemeral conversations going in a certain direction. maybe Nadir first, and then up the chain.
Sure. I mean, Claire, do you maybe want to start, since you've been part of these conversations, this year, and then I can chime in, and then maybe
That's fine.
Sure. Yeah. This is definitely something on the minds of the organizers. We would love to be in a more proactive situation rather than this reactive stance. For now, though, we're really just trying to share. One of our main goals with the live stream is to share the joy of science with the public. Every scientist knows the joy of science. That's what we're in it for. It's a very fun and very challenging profession. And so we do it because we love it. And we're trying to share that love with people who are watching the stream. I think that's one of the real successes of the stream last year. And we're trying to lean into that again. And we think that there's huge potential for making this a more sustained effort, both from our audience perspective. We've had just amazing comments coming through the chat all the time, questions, people who are super curious just about how our Earth works, but also on our speaker side. Our scientific community has really rallied behind this event the past year and this year again. Just lots of us don't know always how to have the opportunity to connect with the public, and this platform has been really appealing to people.
Yeah, the interactivity is great. I've been noticing lots of questions coming in nonstop, and hopefully some from students too. One of the most disturbing aspects of the sort of disinvestment in science that Rob was talking about, and not just that, but the defunding and killing positions, is it's endangering the pipeline. This is a pipeline process. Knowledge building is always one scientist handing off to the next. The Rob Socolows handing off to the Claire's and Nadir's, and this is kind of a really big jolt to that whole system. And of course, this is not restricted to climate. In public health and in the health sciences right now, we're seeing the same thing.
So Andy, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because to me, third-party validation is, because I feel almost myself a third party here. Why is the business community not speaking up about this attack on American science? Who's going to hire the graduates of that? Why aren't the Republican congressmen, who may be finally feeling a little bit of power, acting at this on this? So what are we doing? This we're being spiteful to, and this is not a good strategy. And if you want to be a leader in the world, what is holding back so many people from speaking out who could validate what these young people are doing?
Well, lawmakers like Bill Cassidy were clearly held back by Trump, and he showed what he could do, and he did it. And now Bill is, even though Bill Cassidy is senator, he's a physician, even though he
senators are stepping down. Former senators and former governors aren't in office anymore. Business leaders may get their company targeted, but if they do it in the right way, they could get a large enough group of companies that wouldn't happen.
I think social tipping points do happen, and they're also unpredictable, just like biogeophysical ones. I think there's a tendency now toward Trump. I think he's eroding his own prospects for not just for himself, but for Trumpism.
So one way to think about this whole effort of weather and climate is as a nudge toward getting to that tipping point sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and as far as the business community goes, I think it's just this business of being cowed. It's just, there's a certain aspect of authoritarianism that I've had people on here they study, is it just like you study climate? The people at this place in Europe called the VDEM Institute study the vital signs in society that point toward authoritarian or communitarian democratic rule. And they came out with a report that I highlighted in a discussion here in I guess it was early 2025, that U-turns from authoritarianism back toward democracy are happening more in recent decades than they were in the earlier part of the 20th century. And the conditions, though, that they articulate are that if an authoritarian style regime is in power for more than 10 years, it's really hard to have a U-turn. But, and I haven't had them on since the election in Hungary, because they pointed to Hungary as the case study, and Orban having gotten to the point where authoritarian rule was cemented so much that it would be very hard to reverse. But now they've had their election and it's been reversed. So history is not always also a prologue to what's to come, whether it's social media or other things that which can be so negative, but can also be positive in situations like that. It's possible that there's conditions on the planet that are changing, that you can get these reversals quicker. Brazil reversed from Bolsonaro in a way that doesn't look like it's going to repeat, although the risk is there still. So I guess, and one the takeaway from that discussion was work hard across all sectors of society to, if you're a shareholder in a company, right to the CEO. If you're at a university, make sure you're not being cowed. If you're at a law firm, make sure you're doing what you can. If you're in politics, running for office, if you can. That there are things you can do that can raise the odds of avoiding the negative slide into further unitary executive kind of control. It's not easy, and there's no single pathway.
And do authoritarians always attack science? I don't think so.
Say that again?
Do authoritarians always attack science? Yes, there's
they attack
an
science.
independent streak in science, but there's also a value to an authoritarian in having science, isn't it?
Well, Lysenko in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, Lysenko's a terrible example. Yes.
Yeah, it's.
Andy, could I follow up to the question you asked a little while ago about what we're hoping for from the live stream? Circling back to that, another thing that I've noticed just in my own thinking and trying to communicate is that there were just so many incredible science stories that got documented in the live stream in a way that was accessible. And just to give a couple of examples, Ralph Keeling, Charles Keeling's son, who continues the monitoring of trace gases, including CO2 and O2, and you had him, I think, on your program just a little while ago.
Yeah.
He gave a marvelous, half an hour keynote talk last year, telling the story of these measurements, including, he was around when his dad was taking, the first CO2 measurements, and he remembers, the scatter plot of data from the first few months, and then the next few months, and it was lower, and then the next few months it was higher again, and they were slowly starting to resolve the seasonal cycle, but didn't even know it yet, and that wouldn't become clear for a few years. And so we're hearing firsthand what it was like, the first ever in situ measurements of atmospheric CO2 and what that evolving understanding was. And I just thought that that was an incredible story to be documented. Jeff Masters, who started the Weather Underground and before that was a hurricane hunter, gave an edge of the seat talk about his experience flying into Hurricane Hugo.
Right.
And talked about both why they did it and then about what happened on that incredible flight, how they misjudged the hurricane because of the data they did and didn't have. So there are a number of examples like this, and I've shared those stories with people, including with journalists, because these are the stories that haven't been widely told. Yes, those of us in the science community kind of know about them, but I don't think you can go in the bookstore and buy a book that tells you in this kind of detail about these kinds of things. This is just not part of the popular narrative about our field.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to get these stories out. And I had a keynote last night in which I talked about the long arc of model development here at GFDL, which was a team effort, but had a couple of leaders, Suki Manabe, who won a Nobel Prize, and then his partner, Kirk Bryan, who was an oceanographer, and how they developed models over decades. And they had multiple versions of the model. And each time they added complexity to the model, they learned something new, that the stratosphere would cool under global warming, or that the Arctic would warm extra, or that the land surfaces would warm more than the ocean surface. And that's another story that I don't think has been told. And these predictions have come true. They are now in the data. And they were made decades ago. And it's a beautiful science story, but it's also a story of concrete predictions that have consequences that people care about. So anyways, I see the live stream as, a marvelous venue for not only getting some of these stories out, but then documenting them, because the live stream team has then done an amazing job of indexing dozens of hours of talks by their speakers and creating a nice web page. And so you can just browse the web page, search for the speaker, and click a link and be taken right to it. So for me, that's also part of the lasting value.
Oh, that's good to know. I was looking on the homepage for the, let's see here.
Yeah, so if you go to the live stream page, and then I think you have to navigate to like the 2025 live stream.
Right.
2025 event. And if you scroll down.
Oh, I see. Oh, this is great.
Keep going. It's just
the fact that they're tagged is great. Okay.
Yeah, you can search by topic. You can search by speaker. And you can do the same on our YouTube channel. Every talk is tagged.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So this will be an enduring resource, and subdividing it into these components is really, really helpful. Oh, there's Kate Marvel. Awesome. Well, this is all a great introduction to what's going on. If you don't mind, I thought I'd go back to the live stream here for a bit, and I'll just play it a little more.
Flurry of questions.
We're live again.
So I guess let's start off with Sidney Lopez asks, I'm curious as to your opinion about this season. Is this year likely to be as bad as people are saying it's going to be?
I think likely, yes. There is going to be a very significant El Nino this year. It is not totally clear exactly how bad it's going to be. That's the kind of thing that the models are still showing some differences on. I think there's a lot of headlines you'll see that are about this thing called a quote super El Nino, which is sort of a colloquial term. And so it's actually not totally clear if it is going to be the worst El Nino we've ever seen, like some of the models are forecasting that it will be. But I think the thing you can hang your hat on at this point is that there is going to be an El Nino this winter, and it is likely to be very significant.
And to that point, how can these vulnerable countries and in the tropics protect against these economic issues associated with this year's upcoming event?
I think there's a lot of options that have been raised previously in the literature, even just putting into place early warning systems or other sort of short-term predictions that allow countries to know when, for example, major rainstorms are likely to occur or major wildfires are likely to break out, can help these countries prepare. I think more generally, we need to ensure that these countries have the sort of economic base that is resilient to sort of climate stress. If you have a place where people are vulnerable, people depend on, for example, in Peru, a lot of fishers depend upon the highly productive fisheries across right outside the coast of Peru, which is driven by all these nutrients upwelling that gets shut down during El Nino events. And so Peruvian fishers are really vulnerable to these events. And so ensuring that those fishers either have insurance, either they have a government support, they have other economic options in the face of these disasters is really essential.
Great. And we did have a comment when you were showing all those previous examples about the flooding in California in 1862 flooding. Do you feel we are ready for this major El Nino this year, especially given the funding limitations and cuts if they were to keep going with the upcoming budget changes?
It's not totally clear. I think one thing that is worth saying is that El Nino does have a very big impact on a lot of tropical countries. What it means for the US is often a little bit more questionable. Every El Nino is different and often has very different effects. And so some El Nino years in the past for the US have been very catastrophic and some have been basically negligible. And so I think we're still a little bit unclear on exactly what this year is going to mean for us. I will say that another agency that has really taken a hit recently alongside the weather forecasting services is FEMA. Right, is the federal disaster aid infrastructure that is built to help states withstand disasters. And so I think if a major disaster were to occur, like a flood in Southern California driven by El Nino, I am worried that our disaster response capability is not going to be able to withstand that event.
Great. Thank you so much for that insight. It's really important that we talk about these impacts with the budget cuts. We do have a few more questions. Does a strong La Nina also cause large damages, or does it affect other parts of the world?
This was a pretty difficult question for us to figure out, partly because there are not as many strong La Ninas as strong El Ninos. So El Nino is sort of asymmetric, where you have a lot of strong El Nino events, and then the La Nina events tend to be kind of weak and like less.
I got to say, this is pretty interesting.
I must say, yeah.
It's infectious just watching.
Because maybe you get some moderate rainfall, you get some maybe moderate warmth that is maybe better for your country. There is other research out there showing that La Nina can be damaging in the way that the commentator is suggesting. So I actually think the economic impacts of La Nina are kind of still uncertain. Like that's a place where there's still a lot of research ongoing. And I think we actually know less about it than we know about El Nino.
And to that question, LEB asked, does public funding also help you collaborate with scientists at other universities to move this research forward?
Absolutely, 100%. It is absolutely essential for us to be able to build both national and global networks to be able to both monitor the global tropics, which is essential for forecasting and understanding El Nino, and drawing on the expertise of all the scientists around the world that know about this phenomenon, because it is a truly global phenomenon. One thing I will say is that one recent move by the current administration is not necessarily beyond budget cuts, is also to restrict the ability of researchers to collaborate internationally. So there are new regulations that are being attempted to be put in place that would require researchers to basically pre-register foreign collaborations and allow funding agencies to cut funding if researchers have foreign collaborations that are seen as undesirable. And so I think that, even along with budget cuts, will be really catastrophic for our global understanding of the climate.
Absolutely. That is a very important point to make, that we are talking globally when we're talking about weather and climate. It does not exist in a bubble. Lastly, we have one last question that's more on the technical side. Why is Australia so much less affected by El Nino compared to Southeast Asia or South Africa? They would have expected more red there. So any comments on that?
This was actually a question we had for ourselves as well. Like, we were surprised at how little we found the effect to show up in Australia. I think one reason for that might be just that we were looking at country level economic growth. So economic growth across the whole country and the sort of teleconnection of El Nino to the whole country. I think if you looked at, for example, like Northeast Australia or specific sectors in places that were closer to the areas that are affected by El Nino, you actually might see more significant impacts. I also wonder where Australia might be a place that's actually more affected by La Nina, which tends to bring really significant rainfall to the Western Pacific and maybe on that northeast coast of Australia. And so I think that's something that is maybe just sort of a limitation of our sort of coarse global approach and might be better answered by sort of more local or more fine scale methodologies.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher. That was a really informative and very topical discussion on El Nino as we're going.
Yeah, I would say so. If these El Nino years definitely feel like a prime teachable moment for having people understand why not just weekly forecasts, but long-term forecasts of conditions are important. And understanding the next step, which is how do you know that through all the measurements that are taken. And
I thought that segment was terrific, and both at the content and at the meta level of how scientists learn, which I emphasized before. Would that segment, Andy, have an effect on some of the audiences that you're trying to reach? What are their defense mechanisms to push it away?
Well, I think the point that Nadu made about having this subdivided into chunks, having those pieces available for social media uptake, so that someone writing a note to their legislator can include it and say, here's someone in our state, or here's how this affects our part of the country. That's really a valuable thing to have. Making sure it's really these nuggets can be seen, as you were saying, searchable on the website and then shareable after the fact. That feels like where you could have a significant effect, because you're saying it publicly. One thing I liked about Twitter back in the old days which is still possible, but the algorithms make it a lot harder, is virtually every elected official has a Twitter account. A lot fewer have Blue Sky accounts. And that means you can post something, say, hey, Congresswoman so-and-so, here's a scientist in our district who just made a really important point about ocean buoys. and it's there as part of the public record. And they kind of, whether they see it or not, is now it's harder because of the algorithms. But it's a way to take content like this and make it useful. So I think now that I understand the back end, I think that's the key. Get this 50 hours done, dice it up into nuggets that can go on Instagram as well. I'm not much of an Instagram person. I'm still figuring out TikTok. And some of that is probably a waste of time, but some of it is not a waste of time. And you don't know unless you try. I guess that's a big part of it too. Writing letters in the local newspaper, if you still have a local newspaper, is also important. And you can include a link to this kind of video and doing that.
Claire, I'm wondering, so last year, I think we did identify a handful, I don't know, it was probably a dozen or less kind of short clips, 20, 30 seconds, again, kind of postable, Instagrammable, to highlight. Do you know if there's talk of something like that again? Because again, what's linked, so Andy, what's linked on the website are, these 20-minute talks. But I think for some of the applications you're talking about, you want to really pick a talk that was interesting and then zoom even further in and pull out a 30-second or minute-long nugget.
Yeah, this is definitely an effort that is ongoing right now as the stream is live and will continue in the weeks afterwards of really trying to identify these nuggets of something super interesting or super important pieces that one of our speakers says during their talk or during answering a question that we think is just exactly spot on a message that people need to hear, that we'll be clipping into these short format videos to share across our socials. That's part of the strategy for sure.
And that might be an area where students and communication programs at colleges can help out. Or I just did a talk yesterday with Chris Mooney, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning climate journalist who's now moving to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where Oak Ridge is, near there. And his program is all about this, about how to make science and health, how to make public health, climate, and other science meaningful and useful. And if we can harness that capacity of students in programs like that to do a little bit of the sifting and repurposing, then that feels like it could be helpful. After we're done, I could reach out to a few people who, it's summer right now, but it won't be for long. And there's time even before November for some of that to happen. So that would be, just Blue Sky here. I would think that would be something to think about doing pronto. And I'd be happy to help.
Yeah, we would love that. We are fortunate to have a whole bunch of enthusiastic volunteers, but as the live stream keeps growing bigger and bigger, it seems like you can never have too many people to help out.
Yeah, for sure. And ones who understand social media. That's a key part of this too. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. We're all, working hard, and I may just let this play out for a little while and offer a little more commentary before I close out. But so feel free to stay on if you'd like. That's probably what I'll do. I'm just going to let it stream and pull back and say a few things. But at the same time, it's been great to have you on here to brainstorm a little bit about how to take this further. So once the stream is done on the 3rd, we can pick up that conversation. So thanks, Nadir, Rob, and Claire for spending some time here.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Take care. And I'm going to just get this playing again. Hold on a second.
tower locations, which measure energy into and out of the surface that are right here at this red dot close to Omaha. We've got satellite measurements of, say, snow cover and precipitation. And we've got reanalyses, which is a combination of model and observation for some fields we don't have great spatial structures of from observations. And so this is what our simulation looks like compared with radar. So this is rain and snow in the lowest model level, thinking about what a radar might bounce off of. And so here's our observed, right? Here's that cyclone that comes through. And you can see that our simulation produces the cyclone pretty accurately. But when we look at the snow amount, right? So we've got snow amount on this axis here, and we've got date and time. And so our red line is our simulation, and we've got a whole lot of other products where we're thinking about how much snow exists around Omaha. And you can see that the snow melts more slowly in our simulation than all these other estimates of how quickly the snow melts. Why is that? Why does the snow melt too slowly in our simulation? So what makes snow melt anyway? Well, energy into the surface melts snow, right? And that energy could come from shortwave radiation, energy from the sun, right? That comes through the atmosphere and hits the surface and warms it through shortwave radiation. Everything that has a temperature emits radiation. So our atmosphere and clouds, they are all emitting radiation, but at cooler temperatures, so with longer wavelengths. So that's long wave radiation. If we have air that's warmer than the surface, that imparts sensible heat into the surface. So that's energy into the surface. If we have a lot of moist air that comes over that surface, it can condense onto the surface, and that releases latent heat. We're going from a vapor to a solid. So we're releasing latent heat. So these energy fluxes into the surface can melt snow.
I think he froze.
And so when we compare our simulation with reanalysis, we see our precipitation here. Our solid red line is our simulation, and the dashed line and the black line are observations and reanalyses. And you can see that for precipitation and radiation and sensible heat flux, our simulation looks very similar to what we see in observations and reanalyses. But this latent heat flux is underrepresented. And we think that this might be a major reason why that snow doesn't melt as quickly as it does in observations. You can see this really clearly in these spatial plots, right? These red lines are energy into the surface from latent heat flux. And the blue filled space is where snow is. And here we see strong negative fluxes into the snow. But in our simulation, it just stops. It just stops right here at the edge of the snowpack. We think that that's not correct. But it could just be us. We could just be bad at doing simulations, right? So we also checked this in some simulations that were performed at NCAR with really high resolution simulations. And we also, this is known as CONUS 404. A lot of really, really smart people worked on this simulation. And we also see these negative fluxes just go right up to the edge of the snow and won't go over top of it. And in fact, these latent heat fluxes are really important. We did some snow modeling where we forced it with fluxes from the flux tower site.
So you're listening here to the live stream, the 50-hour live stream of scientists working on weather and climate understanding here in the United States, particularly, and trying to make the point that the research they do matters to the public and should matter to policymakers. Where they're doing this at a time when the federal support for this kind of basic science has imploded, and unless Congress, including Republicans who have a way to not be cowed by the current president, unless they reverse this trend, the impacts will be felt by many Americans in agricultural districts, anyone in a floodplain, anyone where flash flooding can occur, which can basically be anywhere. If you don't have the operational monitoring systems and the capacity to understand them, which those are human beings, and computers and computer systems, you're setting yourself up for trouble. And you're also setting yourself up for trouble going forward, because science is a journey involving multiple generations. Today's experts and the veterans ahead of them, and then the young scientists and technologists coming up the chain who need to feel excited and feel that there's a future for the work they do, and that the country that they live in values having a better picture of vulnerabilities and opportunities around us in our dynamic weather and climate system. So this is all a very worthy effort by scientists to explain what they do, try to connect that with audiences that might not normally focus on that work. And they're encouraging people to call their legislators, their Congress people, and make the point that the science and the budgets that sustain it are important to them. And if they would like to stay in office, then they should not just stay in office, but if they would like to stay relatively safe in a changing system, they should support this. So this will go on through into tomorrow. Right now we're hearing a scientist, I think he's in Oklahoma, Ron, and I could tune you back in to have a listen. It's wclivestream.com. You could listen there yourself through the next 24 hours. Get in touch with me through the scrolling bar at the bottom if you have questions. And I really appreciate the scientists who came on here a little earlier to talk to you about why this effort is underway. And I will go back to the homepage for this project, which I think is even more valuable than the live stream, because there you can pick up individual nuggets. You can search through them to share with your community. If you're in an agricultural district, or if you're facing any kind of risk, you can find a science story that's relevant to that. I'm going to unmute.
We have a question from Hannah Palco asking, could the snow model be incorrect because it was created on historical data that did not account for the current weather patterns due to climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something that I particularly think a lot about when we're thinking about using machine learning and AI to train some of these relationships for future climates. Where we come from in terms of our numerical modeling, we're thinking about how do we best represent these physical processes. And so what Eric went through was thinking about, okay, well, what is the physical analog? So
let me take you back to the homepage so you can understand how you can mine this content and use it constructively going forward. Here's wclivestream.com. You can watch the current one that's going on through tomorrow, or you can connect, learn how and where to you can join the live stream. I think they might be booked up by now, or you can talk to Congress about what you're seeing. They did a walk from New York City to Washington to deliver a message about weather and climate science as well. And you can go, what I think is most useful is you can go back to the archive. Let's see if I can do that. Menu. Here's the last year's event. And there's all kinds of tags. So you can look at conversations that were about hurricanes, ecosystems, corals, coastal issues. And you can scroll through and find, with search, find chats that relate to questions you would want to explore with your community or with your representatives in Congress or anyone else, your classroom. So I think that's really a really useful thing to do. And that's a wrap for today. This is Andy Revkin, and I really appreciate your time as listeners and viewers here. Think about supporting what I do. Go to revkin.substack.com, and there's a way to contribute. I know that's tough these days. I do most of this just because I have a passion for sharing information that isn't a function of making money. I don't do this to make money, but it doesn't hurt to have some justification for the time I put in. Thank you again for watching. This is Sustain What? This has been an episode about the weather and climate live stream. And before I end, I want to show you one other thing that I think is relevant. I almost forgot. Astronauts for America. This is also new today. Hold on. Stop sharing. Oh, I see what I have to do. Hold on. This is worth your seeing. So hold on a second. I know a number of astronauts. Been lucky enough to meet some over the years, and there is a nonpartisan entity called Astronauts for America that is launched, in which they've stated in a letter, our country is the mission. And these are people who've had the honor of seeing our planet from outer space, from orbit, I should say. And not only a few hundred people have had that honor. And as they say, they're a nonpartisan organization of former NASA astronauts who have sworn to defend the Constitution. And we are committed to science, evidence-based decision-making, public service, and the rule of law. We work to uphold constitutional principles and support leaders who demonstrate commitment to those principles. We're focused on preventing American constitutional democracy from the long term beyond any election cycle, for protecting it for the long term. And they wrote a letter to America, which I'm not going to repeat right now, but I do want to play this. I hope, I'm not sure if it's going to work because StreamYard is quirky.
It began with a dream.
You may not be able to hear this.
That ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things.
This nation was founded on an idea.
Basically,
the concept of freedom, equality, the rule of law, and our democratic system.
It's unique around the world.
And
we are the country that set foot on the moon. This is the land of opportunity, the American dream. But today,
we've seen an erosion of those constitutional rights.
The core values of our country, they're being challenged.
We believe majority of Americans believe the same thing.
Every NASA astronaut swears an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States.
Astronauts for America.
Astronauts for America.
Astronauts for America is a nonpartisan organization.
This ideal that we are greater together, that it is our differences that are our strength, that are our superpower.
Astronauts for America wants to help people get back to understanding civics, understanding the principles of the founding of this country.
Values that I want for my kids, for my grandkids, and for all Americans going forward.
It's an opportunity for us to stand up and invite all Americans to stand up for themselves, for their rights as Americans.
We're a nation of diverse ideas, and that's what makes us so great.
We are all a part of this together.
We have to make it happen. It's not going to just happen on its own.
Well, there you go. Astronauts for America. Learn about what they're up to. You can sign on to join their movement. It shouldn't take a movement like this to sustain the basic principles that our country was founded under, but it's good that people like these astronauts are doing that in a nonpartisan way. Thanks. This is Andy Revkin. This is Sustain What? And it's almost time for me to go kayaking and say hi to our local Pinnipad residents of my part of Down East Maine. And so I'm going to end this broadcast right now. Thank you again for tuning in. Do share this with others when we're done, because it'll be archived immediately.